Hello, Chief. Hello, everyone. This is Officer Cervantes. Welcome to today's media availability, February 15, 2022. Thank you for joining us. Just a friendly reminder to raise your hand if you have.
I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry.
Sir, you may begin.
I'm sorry.
You may begin, sir.
Okay, well, I provided a number of remarks today earlier during my for the Board of Police Commissioner meetings relative to the NFL week that we just completed, the NFL experience and Super Bowl Sunday, the aftermath, as well as the parade for tomorrow. And then I also commented on a non-categorical and our crime stats. But rather than going back through that, what I'd like to do is just open it up for questions, and I'll let me respond to those instead.
Thank you, sir. Our first question will be from Stephanie Dazio. Go ahead with your question.
Thanks so much, Officer Cervantes. Good afternoon, Chief. I have two very unrelated to each other questions.
Okay.
Number one, the San Francisco DA has talked about what's in the news lately about a rape victim's rape kit being used to further a criminal case against the victim. I got a statement earlier today saying that LAPD does not do this. Wanted to confirm that and your thoughts on what's going on in San Francisco. And the other question is, you talked maybe a year ago more, saying that you had LAPD had 3 officers who went to the rally on January 6th in DC, and they were believed to have not gone to the Capitol. Can you provide us an update? Is that still the case? Or is the number higher than 3? Were they found to be at the Capitol? Are they still employed?
Yeah. Okay. So let me handle the last one first. Our investigation that we shared with the FBI was that on January 6th, there was a political rally in the Washington Mall area in which 3 of our employees self-identified as having traveled to Washington, D.C. and attended. Those 3 employees all denied any involvement in the insurrection. They denied ever being on Capitol grounds in any prohibited area. And we, again, provided all the information to the FBI, and they found no evidence that our 3 individuals had any that involved themselves in any illegal activity at all. So we've closed that investigation and finding that the officer's actions or the individual's actions were attending a political rally, which is a protected First Amendment activity, and did not violate any Department Code of Ethics or any state law or federal law. I consider the matter closed. We've tried to answer this on a number of occasions, and I will continue to answer as I have. Relative to the San Francisco case, I will say that I've been in commission since 9:30 this morning in closed session, and then another couple of meetings. So I've not reviewed the news reports, but I understand that the question of the department was when we collect a sex kit, a sexual assault kit from a victim of a sexual assault, whether or not we upload the results of that information for a suspect or an offender profile into a database. We do collect sexual assault kits from victims of sexual assaults. And in those analysis of those kits, if we identify an offender's DNA, then subject to CODIS, the state and national database, that profile will be loaded into for comparison purposes of both known and unknown sexual assault and other crime offenders. So I don't know how that fits into San Francisco other than any assertion about the victim's DNA being uploaded into CODIS or a database as such. Certainly the department does not do that. We would not want to have anything that would slow down a victim's willingness and participation as we attempt to identify people responsible for such a terrible crime of sexual assault.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Mr. Steve Gregory. Go ahead with your question.
Unmute. Good afternoon, Chief. Thank you. My questions are all kind of surrounding vaccination and mandates and whatnot. I've been talking to a few officers, and they've been expressing to me that they're a little concerned about moving forward about the city's, I guess, the timing in which they're either going to suspend or terminate employees who have either not been vaccinated or refused to register with the system. I'm wondering if you can give us an update on that, and I do have a couple of follow-ups on that.
Well, the deadline for officers to either be fully vaccinated or to file for an exemption has been long past. And I'm happy to say that with only the exception of a few, everyone is either now fully vaccinated, standing over 83%, almost nearly 84% of the workforce. And the remaining individuals have all filed for exemption requests, with the exception of some that are off long-term injury or away from work because of some sickness or other absence. The exemption review of those exemption requests, whether it be for sincerely held religious belief or a medical accommodation, both of those are proceeding forward. What I've tasked with our personnel division is to work with the city personnel department and the city attorney's office to identify each of the next sequential steps and timeline for the review of each of those requests. What is the criteria that must be met? What is the interactive process with the involved employee? Then what is the decision point? Where in that process then do I make a decision as a general manager? And my decision of whether to accept that request, what are the factors, being the factors of a sincerely held religious belief or a reasonable medical accommodation, and then also the city's allowance of an unvaccinated person who has a sincerely held religious belief to be tested and wearing a mask and remain in a workplace. And what is that standard? Once that is written down, we're also going to articulate then where this will go for further review, being the personnel department general manager, a committee that's been appointed by the city to evaluate requests across the entire city so that there's one standard of acceptance or denial, and then their decision as to whether to accept or deny, and then the written protocols to include that decision will then come back to the general manager and how much time I have in order to make a final decision as to any reasonable accommodation. Where I'm at right now is working with the city to ensure that each of those steps and entire protocol is laid out so that each employee that we have a responsibility now to have an interactive process is fully informed as to how that process will unfold. I think it's really critical that we not have inconsistencies or misunderstandings, and that employees in such a critical conversation understand their responsibilities are and what the rights and responsibilities of the department and as a city employer are. So that's where we're at right now in that next stage. And then I expect that to be done here in the next, I would hope this week or next week. And then we begin the individual aspect of meeting with each employee and going through that interactive process and moving forward on a final determination of what requests will be accepted and which requests will not be accepted.
And who gets to determine the medical exemption, and who gets to determine the religious exemption?
So we're going to have that written down and defined. The ordinance provides for much of this, but currently the department will rely upon the personnel department for the medical accommodation. I'm not being a doctor myself, evaluating the circumstances of what a doctor's note or explanation that the employee provides. We received some guidance from the city attorney's office and the personnel department about how to frame or evaluate that. But I look to the personnel department, who has a medical director for the city of Los Angeles, to help ensure that our interpretation is correct. And the same for the sincerely held religious belief. We've been given some guidance by the personnel department and by our city attorney's office. And on that one, I believe that upon the guidance and we're seeing what documentation the employees provide will give me an opportunity to evaluate as a general manager in a consistent way with fire department, DWP, and other departments, what is a sincerely held religious belief, and when is that threshold met, and then secondly, what allowance will the city provide for people who hold that sincerely held belief? What reasonable accommodation can be made in the workplace? So there's I don't mean to be vague on this, but I think the next set of rules is to give you and the public as well as our employees a step-by-step guide about how that process will work, how it will unfold, what the timelines are, so there's no misunderstandings.
Sure. And in talking to some of these officers, I think they're wondering about timing of this. Why weren't all of those protocols established before the city decided to, punish those that didn't want to get vaccinated or whatever the case was? But the timing seems a little off, and there is some suggestion or intimation that you guys are dragging your feet on this in hopes that either the feds are going to make some decisions, the emergency orders will be lifted, and that you needed the staffing to get you through Super Bowl.
So I appreciate the viewpoints. I will say that our goal is a fully vaccinated workforce, and the deadlines that we met was that has resulted in 5 out of 6 of our employees being fully vaccinated. For those that remain, they're employees that are exercising their rights within the civil rights law and the ADA, American Disabilities Act, to apply for an exemption. The process of evaluating that has taken time. And while I apologize for that, the length of time it's taken, it's not punished anyone. The employees that have filed for those exemptions are allowed to remain in the workplace as long as they, previous to this week, are taking twice-a-week tests and continue to wear face coverings as all employees are. But the aspect of, well, this should have happened earlier, or all this should have been done before we insisted that this be a fully vaccinated workforce, and before we required people to file for exemption requests, I'll stand by the process the city has provided. I think it builds public's trust, and I think that it's fair and it's a rational basis for us to deal with a thorny and really a previously a process that previously has been undefined. So even with that, again, you're right, Steve. I'd love to have all these guidelines and all this all clearly laid out and defined. But when I asked for them more than a couple of weeks ago, I found I've got verbal representations, not things that are written down. And I believe that in such a critical area of whether a person is going to be removed from their position as an employee of this organization, that they and the public deserve to have a clear understanding of what that process will entail.
Okay, out of respect for my colleagues, I'm going to bow out. I do have follow-up, but I'll bow out now. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Mr. Rick from CBS. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much, Chief. Thank you for your time. Just wanted to go back to the parade for a moment. You mentioned earlier today about having resources downtown. Is this because of the activity that we've seen over the weekend, or is there something more specific? And then also, scale-wise, are we looking at resources to be in downtown or at the parade like we saw in downtown on Sunday? Or if you can kind of explain that just a little bit more for us.
So it is the effort of identifying that we would have added staffing, bolstered our uniform presence in the downtown business core, including along the LA Live area of downtown, is twofold. One, it is in part a response to the recognized disturbances and violence that we saw, unfortunately, in the aftermath of the Rams' victory on Sunday night. Secondly, we have had a number of parades over the last 20 years in the city, and we have seen in many of them, or the occasion where splinter groups, those not the majority, not even a significant number, but individuals will believe that the celebration is not over for them until they've caused a little bit of disturbance or recklessness and done something stupid, like coming downtown and doing a sideshow or trying to take over an intersection and do donuts or worse, commit some type of violence, whether it be against property or an officer or someone else. So that's why we're going to augment our staffing and ensure that we have more than sufficient resources that can quickly respond. They'll be present. They won't have to respond far. The hundreds of officers that will be along the parade route, once that parade route is completed, those officers will be freed up for added patrols both around the parade area, the celebration area, as well as in the downtown area. But the public will see, business community, tourists and others will see a marked increase in the number of uniform officers, as well as resources that'll be there that will not be seen. They'll be monitoring for the aftermath of what we think should be a great and fun day for Los Angeles, an opportunity to be proud of the victory that the Rams achieved, to be proud as Angelinos. But we do unfortunately recognize that we're going to have a couple knuckleheads likely, and for that we want to make sure that we're well staffed to identify them and take the appropriate action to get them off the street and bring them before the criminal justice system. I hope I'm wrong. I'd be very happy, and I hope that I'm wrong. But we don't prepare for hope. We deal with reality. And this past Sunday night, while the vast majority of 4 million people in this city celebrated in a responsible way, and we're proud of what the Rams achieved, we had a couple hundred that chose to do something different, and we want to be prepared for such an eventuality should that occur tomorrow.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Mrs. Lauren Lister. Go ahead with your question.
Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry, I was muted.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Chief, for taking my question. Rick did touch on what I was hoping to touch on, which is Super Bowl parade security. So I'll just ask this. Maybe do you have any tips for people coming out to the parade as far as making it smooth and safe and secure for them? And then also there's been some criticism over the department's use of foam projectiles Sunday night downtown to disperse that crowd. Maybe you could speak to that issue too.
So let me deal with the first one first. There is mass transit available. There is a rail station very nearby the parade route, just on the southern border of USC. If people are going to come to the parade, which we hope that they will, crowd estimates are in excess of 20,000. That recognizing 20,000 people in the downtown core on a Wednesday morning, plan ahead, travel early. We'll have the route's going to be the securing of that route begins in the early morning, bike rail and so forth, street closures. So plan ahead, arrive early. The weather is going to be different than today. Today would be a perfect parade day because it's kind of gloomy and not a lot of sun out there. I think tomorrow is going to be a little warmer, a little more sun. So if you bring your children with you or others, make sure you brought some water along, some sunscreen, and get ready for a festive occasion. And hopefully people will follow the route of the parade and go to the Coliseum and enjoy the celebration that's there, and then plan their route back. Not planning just how do they get there, but how they're going to get back home. But let me now transition to the reports regarding the use of less lethal munitions, specifically 37 millimeter munitions and 40 millimeter. Those are the two reference standards. We used a total of 4 individual rounds or shot of the 37 millimeter less lethal weapon system. We used a total of 5 individual shots of the 40 millimeter target specific munition system. This was over a course of 3 hours involving hundreds of demonstrators or protesters or individuals that at times were throwing rocks and other projectiles, including pyrotechnics, towards officers that were damaging and created tens of thousands of dollars of damage to property involving 2 MTA buses, 19 instances of vandalism to businesses, 1 business that was broken into and looted. And in that entire ordeal, as officers defended themselves and also dispersed unruly crowds who refused to leave areas after unlawful assemblies were declared and continued in their violent actions, the department and its efforts to restore control and order resorted to those two types of weapon systems at that very limited basis. I am grateful that none of the officers involved were injured. I'm grateful that none of our officers were blinded by the lasers that were there. I'm grateful that there wasn't any civilians or community members that were injured or killed, including by the man that was doing donuts in the middle of the intersection at Olympic and Figueroa that had a gun inside his car. So I've heard the criticism of others about the fact that they don't believe the department utilized those weapon systems compliant with our policies. We're reviewing that right now. My preliminary understanding of it is that our officers acted well within our expectations of our policies and our directives. But I'll ensure that we review body worn, and if anyone has a complaint that believes that such a weapon system was used against them inappropriately, or they witnessed it, I encourage them to make themselves known, and we'll investigate it. But at the same time, I also want to speak to the community in which this at times riotous act occurred, that we're going to do our very best to protect you. Those business owners, we're going to do our very best to protect your belongings for everything you got your life invested in. And to the revelers that are there and just witnessing all this, I'd ask that they follow our dispersal orders and leave, because they're dangerous circumstances. And we can see very dramatic and terrible results from people who using these pyrotechnics, using projectiles, engaged in their reckless actions, can hurt and maim others. And so with this, again, no use of force that police ever use is pretty. No use of force that police ever use is going to look to an uninformed eye as necessarily needed. But I stand by our people at the same time, because at the images I'm seeing, I'm proud of the fact that they were able to eventually restore order without having to resort to greater levels of force. And that's not made to be said in a manner that is insensitive to the fact that an officer's actions or a decision could be in violation of our policy. But at the same time, I find ourselves constantly at times trying to defend when officers are absolutely at their wits' end, trying to do their very best in a difficult circumstance. And people who were not there and nowhere around, and without even looking at any information, have already made judgments, decisions that our officers were wrong.
Thank you, Chief. Steve Gregory, did you have an additional question?
Yeah, Chief. First of all, I just wanted to know the standardized word knucklehead is your catch-all phrase for all troublemakers. What is it about cops and the word knucklehead?
You know, it's
Oh, I'm just joking.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's kind of seen as as a neutral word. If it's not, someone's got to tell me. Scoundrel. I don't know if you can do a scoundrel.
I hate to take you back to the COVID stuff, but I've got
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Questions here. I got officers that reach out to me, as you know, and I just want to make sure I'm clarifying these things, because I want to make sure I get all the facts straight. Do you actually foresee that you say about 85% of the department are vaccinated? And if this process continues on, do you have a timeline as to when do you think actual terminations might happen? And do you have an idea of how many people might be terminated as a result of not getting vaccinated?
So let me start with the last one. It is my hope that not a single employee loses their job. We've unfortunately already seen, I believe, a total of 11 of our personnel. Maybe I think it's 11 personnel that have failed to live up to their responsibilities of either being fully vaccinated and exercising an exemption request, or conducting the required tests because they're not vaccinated while they're waiting a denial or approval of their exemption request. Those are individuals that have been directed to boards of rights for removal because of those failures. That, in my view, is I'm sorry to see that that's happened. I'll verify the exact number for you, but the fact that we already have lost employees to this, I'm disappointed that they did not find the means of being vaccinated or exercising exemption requests. And they recognize that the workforce requirement is to be fully vaccinated in the absence of one of those two exceptions. Now, as to those employees that are exercising their rights to a medical accommodation or religious accommodation, I appreciate their patience. This is the effort that the department's engaged in, as I'm sure as the rest of the city is to be fair, to be methodical, to ensure that we don't overreach, and at the same time to hold people accountable to management's rights to insist that the workforce be fully vaccinated in the absence of approved exemptions. I look across other city departments as well, and I recognize that all of us are dealing with a subject that, while on its face may to the public seem relatively simple or straightforward, that in fact it's a little more complicated. And so I ask for our employees' patience. I ask for the public's patience. To the public, I assure you that those that are not vaccinated are being tested, and if they are COVID positive, they're being sent home. They're not being allowed to remain in the workplace. And for those that are vaccinated, I thank them for being vaccinated. It is an absolute lifesaver. As recently as this last week, an individual who was vaccinated was hospitalized, but was released only in a matter of days. When we have others that have been not vaccinated have been hospitalized and have unfortunately lost their life. To update the number, we have a total now of 13 employees that have been sent home due to non-compliance with the vaccination requirements of the department.
Okay, and then a couple more things. Is there a plan at all for these people, instead of termination, doing any kind of a transfer into other work within the department or within the city?
It's my understanding, one of the clarifications I'm trying to get is that the accommodations process, the interactive process, may involve the job assignments outside of LAPD. Now, the reality of that is, what does that mean for a Los Angeles police officer whose skill sets involving being a law enforcement officer? What other jobs could it be accommodated in the city of Los Angeles that would have the same requirements as far as being vaccinated? So that's where I want to ensure that in an active process that we identify any other position in the city that could provide for a reasonable accommodation. I'm not aware of any at this point.
Okay, and then the issue with vaccinations, Chief, when all these rules and mandates went into effect, the world was a different place. The country was a different place. Medically, we were at a different place. The CDC has now come out and said, the vaccine doesn't stop the spread of the virus. It just prevents the person from getting ill. Masking mandates are starting to loosen up. Do you see that this hardline, these rules, this hardline approach could loosen up at any time? And will this continue even after the emergency order for the city of Los Angeles has been lifted?
Well, I think those are good questions, and I'm not in the habit of, or not in a practice of projecting the future, of understanding where vaccine requirements, how they might evolve within the city. It is my hope that, again, employees, all of our people, recognize the value of the vaccine. And while I recognize it has some diminishing qualities as far as preventing people from picking up COVID, the science is clear to this point that it prevents the severity of the virus and from hospitalizing, and certainly from the loss of life of people who are people who are vaccinated simply are not dying from this virus. It can't be said, the same cannot be said for those that are unvaccinated. So the overarching goal of the city of employers is the employer is not to punish employees or not to somehow be to dog them into this because of some insistence of a control factor. It's to save their lives. It's to protect them from the hazards that they're exposed to as members of the police department and other city employees that come into contact as a matter of their work with other people during a pandemic and in the aftermath of a pandemic. I stand by myself being vaccinated, my family being vaccinated. I think that a public being vaccinated is a safer public, and one that's healthier, and one that's going to allow us to move through this challenge of our lifetime. However, with that, we also recognize that our system of government, our society, allows for exceptions to a vaccine under certain controlled circumstances, and I respect that. And I hope, as a chief, as I look at these exemptions, that they're framed in a manner that fit within the exemptions as required. Not because I want to see someone get away with something, but because I want to respect the rights of everyone involved. And at the end of the day, for those that exemptions are granted and we can accommodate, I still would encourage them to find a way to safeguard themselves from this deadly virus. And with that, again, what will happen in the future? I'm not an expert. I'm not a public health expert. I don't know when mask requirements were relaxed, or if they were relaxed, or how they're relaxed, or including the mandates on vaccines as well as for employers. This is all very much it is up in the air. There is turmoil with this. There's many opinions. I'm not going to add mine to the turmoil.
Chief, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steve, for your question.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time as always.
Yep.
Chief, any final thoughts before we end?
No, I appreciate the coverage, and I look forward to a very happy and festive celebration tomorrow, and for LA to show its best side. Take care.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great the rest of your evening.